Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. Lower Manhattan, south of Canal Street, once had only a few thousand people there after working hours. It's totally deserted. And now at sunset, it practically explodes with 60,000 new residents, mostly young and exuberant. Community Board 1 is called on to serve this crowd, and Julie Menin, the board's chair, reigns like the mayor of a new city. It's amazing to me. You know, when I was in the city council, and I remember Fran Ryder, who was the deputy mayor, coming with this plan of making Lower Manhattan a 24-hour community, and that was before 9/11. I thought, ugh, because I didn't like anything they did anyway, so that was part of the problem. But I just didn't think their plan was going to work. But it has worked. It's an amazing phenomena.
Well, the plan worked and then some, Ronnie. It's really incredible to see where Lower Manhattan has become. And certainly after 9/11, people counted us down and out. People said no one is going to stay in Lower Manhattan. They're not going to stay there, they're not going to work there, and they're not going to visit there. And nothing could be further.
And they're not going to move there.
And they're not going to move there. So our population, just since 9/11, has grown by 30,000 residents. And that's just in the Community Board 1 area, which is south of Canal Street. It's an incredible transformation. And it's really a testament to the rebuilding process, to the perseverance of this community and our ability to move forward.
And is it also part that people forget things? They're coming from out of the district. First of all, let's define what Lower Manhattan is. It's Battery Park City.
So it's Battery Park City, it's a financial district, it's South Street Seaport, it's Tribeca. Community Board 1 is really south of Canal, river to river. And this population is really a group that is very, very close-knit. I have to say, the people who are moving to Lower Manhattan, they're moving there for a reason. There are fantastic public schools in the area, there are parks, there's waterfront access, and there's a real feeling of being a part of this community, of this rebuilding process. The eyes of the world are on our neighborhood, and they'll certainly be on the neighborhood, even then some for the 10-year anniversary of 9/11 when we open the memorial in September.
That's right, it's incredible. And then how many people visit?
Well, 5 to 7 million visitors are projected to visit the 9/11 memorial. It will be the most visited site in New York City. And that's not just for a year, it's for many years to come. So we're opening the memorial in September, and then a year after, we're opening the museum.
Yeah. So when people move in, they're moving into not existing stock, because there's a lot of reconstruction, a lot of renovation of office buildings or something, or what?
Well, that's exactly right. So
and new construction.
When Giuliani was mayor, he passed a revitalization program for Lower Manhattan to convert buildings from office to residential. And that program did work because a tremendous number of developers came into Lower Manhattan and converted existing office stock to residential. So we saw that particularly happening in the financial district and around the seaport. But then there were many vacant sites in Lower Manhattan, particularly in Tribeca. So there was a lot of new residential development as well.
Does all of this make historic landmark people crazy?
Well, I think at Community Board 1 have done an effective job in terms of focusing on landmarks. We have a number of historic districts, particularly in the South Street and in Tribeca. We've been very focused on preserving the historic character of Tribeca. We recently did a rezoning along with city planning of northern Tribeca in order to really maintain that community, to make sure it was not overrun by big box retailers or by high rises. And so that type of rezoning was critical to maintaining the context of Tribeca, making sure there wasn't non-contextual development.
And then, of course, it increases or changes the nature of commerce down in Lower Manhattan, right? Because years ago, it was finance, basically.
Right.
Different kinds of wholesale.
Well, that's exactly right. What's interesting about Lower Manhattan is a lot of people think, well, this is a capital of finance. But what we're really seeing with leases signed, like Condé Nast taking 1 million square feet at the Tower 1, that it's changing the whole demographic. The Daily News coming downtown, the Wall Street Journal, many media companies. So we're really seeing a diversification in terms of the type of company that's coming to Lower Manhattan. But if you think of the history of Lower Manhattan, it was a place where we had the nation's first capital. And at that time,
had everything.
It had everything. It actually was a live-work community at that time because there were a lot of storefronts. So you had store owners who would live on top of their store. It really embodied what a live-work community is about. So now we've come full circle, and now again we're seeing people wanting to live and work in the neighborhood.
In the 21st century sense of it, right?
Yes, exactly.
Not over the store, but up high or something. And
right.
it's so when you have this whole thing, how do you how do you have to work to put the commerce and the residential together? I mean, sometimes it's a problem, isn't it?
Well, it can be, but I think we have a pretty good balance because in many areas, particularly in the financial district, that's a neighborhood that actually wants more commerce in terms of small business. They want more restaurants, they want more retail. So what we really try to do on Community Board 1, we have geographic committees. We recognize that the needs of Tribeca might be different than the needs of Battery Park City. So we're the only community board in the city that actually has these geographic as opposed to subject matter committees. It's just a different approach. It's not to say that one is better than the other. It's just it's worked well in Community Board 1. So we've always taken
So instead of saying mayor, it should be like more like president or governor, and these are the different local communities underneath it. It's very interesting. What happens when tourists come in? What happens with the parking? What happens with all of this traveling down there? There's been reconstruction of connections, transportation connections. Is that finished down there?
No, that's not finished. So the transit hub is being built right now. That is a $3.2 billion federal transit hub.
And where is that? That's
it's right on the World Trade Center site. And then at the same time, the Fulton Street Transit Center, which is several blocks away, is also being built. We have somewhat of an antiquated subway system in parts of Lower Manhattan. So what the transit hub and certainly the Fulton Street Transit Center is meant to address is to try to eradicate that problem. Now, one of the big challenges we're going to face is anytime you bring in 5 to 7 million tourists into a neighborhood, it changes the whole equation. I sat on the 9/11 memorial jury. One of my roles on that jury, in my opinion, was to make sure that we had a memorial that really worked for the city and for Lower Manhattan. And that meant bringing the site back up to grade because remember, the site was below grade. And so some of the memorial designs that were really being looked at as finalists would have meant that people would have had to literally walk around all 16 acres. That doesn't work in a city as dense as Lower Manhattan and as New York. So I wanted a memorial that really brought it back up to grade, and that's what Michael Arad's design does. It provides connectivity and access across the site so people will be able to walk, for example, from the financial district to Battery Park City to Tribeca and visit all of those communities.
Well, how many people were on that? What was that?
There were 13. So we had
a commission.
It
or
was
a board?
commission. It was
And how
appointed
many?
by the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation. So we had people like Maya Lin. We had a lot of expertise in terms of architects and designers. And I was really on there as a downtown resident, as someone who could speak about the needs of the community.
And were there any other? How many women were there?
That's a great question. It was pretty equally split. Yeah, it was. It was.
Yeah. But it's so important that you have that community representation. Now, I just read the other day that there was another committee or commission set up or task force that you were not put on.
Right.
What
so
was that?
I've been on the board of the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation since 2007.
Now, when did that start?
So the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation was set up as a city-state, a bifurcated city-state agency shortly after 9/11, and it was focused obviously on the rebuilding of the neighborhood. I was not on the board until 2007. I had been a very active critic of the board prior to 2007. I was then appointed by then Governor Spitzer to be the community's representative on the board. I think what I've really called for in terms of the LMDC is much more accountability and much more transparency. One of the big things the community board was focused on is how much money did LMDC have. We found that they were sitting on $275 million that people were not even aware of. So we shone a light on that. We made sure that money got out to the community. The utility companies, Con Edison at the time, tried to lay claim to that. We fought them successfully and got the money allocated to downtown where the need really is.
So it's always that advocacy thing that comes out. That's the important thing. You always have to have somebody in there willing to really pose the questions and strike out in new ways, right?
Well, I think that's really important, and I do think for community people who are serving on public authority boards, their role should be to make sure the public authority is being accountable and transparent. I mean, this is why people are always suspect of public authorities. You really do need to make sure that there is sunshine, that the sun is shining on them, and that they really are being brought to the light of day.
When you have all these people moving in, a lot of them are young families, aren't
Right.
they? So what happened with the schools? I mean, that's always been a problem down there,
The
hasn't
schools
it?
has been one of our big issues that we've really focused on. So because we have this explosive population growth in Lower Manhattan, we focused on building new schools. So we have 3 new public schools that we have built in the last 4 years in Lower Manhattan, which I don't think any other neighborhood in the city can say that they have been
And
able
it's
to
still
get
not
3
enough.
It's still not enough. I mean, that is the shocking thing is, yes, we have these 3 new public schools, but even with that, we're still about 950 seats short. Now, what we've tried to do in Community Board 1 is we're very data driven. So we do our own population studies because we were not confident that the city was using the right figures. The city would present these figures and we'd say, well, this is absolutely not right. You're not counting this building and this building and this building. So it's important, I always think, for community boards and community groups to be data driven because the data doesn't lie. If you do your own data, you can easily refute what can be erroneous data. So we do these population studies, they showed where the need was, and then we literally had to go out, Ronnie, and scour the neighborhood for sites. It quite frankly shouldn't be that way. The Department of Ed should have a long-range plan to build new schools, but that's not what they have. So it's basically left up to community boards and parent advocates to go out and fight for the new schools.
In the zoning, is there not, it's always been talked about, and I can't remember if it is, if you build a building or you build a couple of buildings of a certain density, shouldn't you really have to provide the shell for a school?
That is the crux of the issue. The problem is we have the city's land use review process, ULURP, which absolutely does not take into account the nexus and the effect on local schools. So large-scale development is being approved routinely all throughout New York City without any nexus to what it's doing to the local schools. There's a much better way. I've written a couple pieces on this over the years saying we need to revise ULURP, we need to reform it, and we should be looking at what other cities are doing. For example,
So is it not part of an environmental impacts?
It's not. If you look at the SECRA and the SECRA, both the city and the state environmental standards, you do not have to, you have to look at the local schools, but it's not one of the factors that can stop the development. And that's very different, by the way, than what other cities are doing. The city of San Francisco, they have mandated set-asides for school seats, for transit, for affordable housing.
Everything.
So it's not this process where there really aren't standards. You can't say with any certainty when a ULURP process starts whether or not a project is going to be approved. And if so, what are the mitigation measures going to be? Why is it in one community where the give back is a school, another it's a park, another it's nothing? That's not comprehensive planning.
So in your community board, when you've divided it by regions, if you come up with land use, does the whole board participate in that?
Well, we do now have a planning committee. We used to deal with it on a geographic basis. Now we have one comprehensive planning committee.
And is there now a comprehensive plan for Lower Manhattan?
No, there's no master plan for Lower Manhattan, which is an interesting point. There's a master plan for the World Trade Center site, but not for the rest of the neighborhood.
And you know, the last master plan developed in the city was during the Lindsay administration, so it's so old, and so it certainly wouldn't reflect Lower Manhattan.
Right.
Isn't that fascinating? You also have Governor's Island, Ellis Island, and what else? Liberty? What are the other islands that come under you?
Well, Governor's Island is the main one,
So
and then we share that jurisdiction with Brooklyn.
And do you have any say in what's going on there and what the plan is?
Well, we do. I mean, I sit on the board now of the new Governor's Island entity. We've been very involved in Governor's Island. Years ago, we advocated that there should be interim uses on Governor's Island. So, for example, the ball field, so that the Little Leagues all throughout the city can use it. Bike paths. We wanted to make sure that while the planning process was being undergone for Governor's Island, that people could actually utilize the island all throughout the city.
So where is it now?
So right now, there are these interim uses. You can go out to Governor's Island this summer. You can ride your bike. You can take a run. You can use the ball fields. There are a lot of great historic sites to be able to visit. And the plans are underway for the parks to be built. In the latest city budget, there's $150 million that was allocated by the city to build out some of the parkland on Governor's Island. But there's still a long way to go.
Is there also, is it going to be a university site?
Well, that's one of the
CUNY
things that the city is looking at. The city is actively looking at whether or not to put educational facilities on Governor's Island. It's a tricky situation because if you put any faculty housing on Governor's Island, the fact is that there are no services there. There's not a drugstore, there's not a dry cleaner, there's not a grocery
every
store. Perhaps it's something that has to be obviously looked at. And the other challenge is revenue generation. We have to make sure that the island, that there is some type of revenue generating model to sustain the services.
Right. It's amazing, isn't it, how long it takes the city to study things? Do you find that?
Yes, we have found that. We've found that particularly in areas like education. I mean, once again, we've been very frustrated by the lack of long-range planning on the part of DOE. So what we've done is we've been very proactive. We've gone out, we've found the sites, we've done the population surveys. So we now have a new school site on Peck Slip. So the School Construction Authority will be building on that site. So that will create another third public school. We built a new school in Battery Park City. That was a site that the community board found in 2005. It was supposed to be slated for a women's museum, but the women's museum had held on to the site for 8 years and only raised $500,000 dollars. We can't have that kind of community use when the schools are overcrowded.
Yeah.
So now we have PS 276, which we got built, which is the city's first green school. And then we have the new school that'll be opening up next year in the Beekman Tower. That's the 76-story Forest City Ratner project. So there'll be a school in that project as well. And interestingly, that was an as-of-right project, but we were able to convince the developer that it was very important to build a school. And that's the other thing, is that what we've tried to do with the new residential development that's happening downtown is say to the developers, you're putting on your marketing brochure proximity to PS 234, PS 89. People are moving in. They're not going to get in. And if you really want to market your apartments, you need to be part of the solution, not part of the problem.
So, and some of them are reasonable. A lot of the developers are reasonable.
So what we found with some of the developers is that, for example, we wanted to get an annex built for 234. So several building projects that were happening in Tribeca, we negotiated an agreement for an annex to be built and for a community center to be built as part of that development.
Are the rentals and the costs lower in Lower Manhattan than they are in other places?
In parts of Lower Manhattan, but not in all. In the financial district, for a period of time, they were lower than in other parts, but now rents are starting to rise again.
As the people move in, the market becomes...
move in, as the services are there. I mean, people used to criticize the financial district years ago and said, well, they're not grocery stores and they're not amenities. Well, that's absolutely not true. There are. And so now that the amenities are there, we're really seeing that the rents are starting to increase dramatically. One of the issues we're very focused on is building more affordable housing. So that's something, for example, in the rezoning of northern Tribeca, we advocated for inclusionary zoning, which would give a bonus to any developer that would build affordable housing on site. It was critical that it be built on site. And we're always looking for ways to build more affordable housing in Lower Manhattan.
Is that 80-20 ratio still around?
So yes, it is. And there have been a number of 80-20 projects, particularly in Tribeca.
What happens with all the construction and the noise? Isn't that the bread and butter of a community board?
Well, it is. I mean, one of the things that many years ago we advocated for was a centralized Lower Manhattan Construction Command Center, a Lower Manhattan Construction czar, if you will. And that is the LMCCC. That is the agency that deals with coordinating all of the myriad construction projects that are happening simultaneously throughout the district. With that said, absolutely people complain about noise. They complain about noise, they complain about street closures, construction. One of the issues we're really concerned about is tour buses. When the memorial opens, there will be all these tour buses. So the initial plan that DOT came to us with, which was to basically put all these buses on Warren Street, which is a narrow residential street in Tribeca, we rejected. And we said, absolutely not, you got to go back to the drawing board. And they have. We're trying to get the tour buses into New Jersey because there's certain sites like Liberty Park where the tour buses could drop off and then take the path. Why are we spending all this money on building the path station if we're not incentivizing people to use public transportation to get to the memorial?
So how did you come to all of this? I mean, you are really into this. And what happened? What got you into it?
Well, I was a lawyer for many years, first in Washington, D.C.
You're
and
pretty
then in
young,
New York.
though, for many years, right?
Well, that was how I started my career as a regulatory lawyer. And really, I wanted to be a regulatory lawyer because I wanted to see the functioning of government. So I specialized in Department of Justice, EPA, Federal Trade Commission, Food and Drug Administration, Consumer Product Safety Commission work, any regulatory work. So that's what I specialized in, and I did that for a number of years. And then I decided that I really wanted to open up a business in Lower Manhattan, and I opened up a small business.
By this time you were living here?
I was living here in Lower Manhattan. And so I opened up a business called Vine, which was a restaurant, it was a gourmet market, it was a catering business. It was catty-corner to the New York Stock Exchange. We had 75 employees. And I opened that business shortly before 9/11 in the year 2000. And there really was a need for more restaurants in Lower Manhattan. There actually weren't that many. And so the business was doing very well, and then 9/11 hit. And obviously, it was a cataclysmic event for everyone in Lower Manhattan and everyone in the city. I decided I wanted to be very involved in the rebuilding process. As a lawyer, I felt that if I could help other small businesses, because what the small businesses faced after 9/11, particularly with the insurance carriers. And at the time, the insurance carriers were taking out these full-page ads saying, we're here for you, Lower Manhattan, we're here for you in your time of need. And yet you would call them and they'd say, well, we're going to give you 3 days of business interruption, or we're going to give you 5 days of business interruption. Those stories were abounding in Lower Manhattan. We were in a frozen zone. Small businesses could not get back on their feet, certainly in 3, 5 days, even a month. And so out of that came a not-for-profit I started called Wall Street Rising, which was really focused on rebuilding the community after 9/11. We built a downtown information center. We did projects to help small businesses.
So did you had to raise money?
We had to raise money, right.
And then you got a lot of volunteers.
And a lot of volunteers, a lot of volunteers. And people were looking for a way to help the community rebuild. And so that's what we did with Wall Street Rising. And then I served on the jury for the 9/11 Memorial. I got appointed to the community board. And then I decided in 2005 to run to chair the board. It was not the most opportune time for me because I had 3 little boys. I had recently given birth to twins. I had a toddler at home. But I do think at certain points in your life, things happen, and it's not always the most opportune time.
It's a wonderful thing to do at that time. It's perfect to be a mother of young kids and to also be active in the community. Somehow it seems to me it always works.
Well, I do think as a parent, you can approach issues in a different way. When people say to me, well, the schools are overcrowded, or people say this park is overcrowded, or people talk about crime, or they're talking about a whole host of issues, I do think you have a certain perspective as a parent, and I think that that perspective is important. When I first became chair of the community board, I was the youngest community board member as chair, and I was one of the few parents on the board. That has changed tremendously. I'm no longer, of course, the youngest person. We have many young people now on our board, and I think that that's really important to have that diversity.
Yeah, that is, but that's appointed basically by the borough president?
It is.
If somebody really wants to be a member, what do they do?
Yes, they should contact the borough president's office. And the council member appoints half, the borough president appoints half, and then the borough president ratifies all of the appointments. And it's a great way to get involved in your community. We deal with grassroots issues. We deal with the creation of new schools and new parks and community centers and affordable housing. But we also deal, Ronnie, with other issues as well. I mean, as you know, in Lower Manhattan, we faced a number of national issues. For example, the 9/11 terror trial.
Right.
They wanted to put, Washington wanted to put the 9/11 terror trial in the heart of our neighborhood at a cost of $200 million of taxpayer money and involving 2,000 security checkpoints. For anyone in the city who's lived next to one security checkpoint, they know how onerous it is. 2,000, it shuts down a neighborhood. It's just not possible, and certainly not in a neighborhood like Lower Manhattan. So we decided to oppose it. We had an idea. The idea was to move the trial to Governor's Island or to one of the upstate military locations, but have a federal court judge preside because we firmly believe in a civilian trial. And by having a solution, that moved the dial. I think oftentimes—
It's very important, I think.
I think it's an important point because oftentimes community groups who want to oppose something will hold a rally and say, we oppose this. Generally, that is a very hard path to— sometimes that can win, but it's generally much harder. It's much better if you have a solution. If you say, we don't agree with this but here's our idea. And that's generally a great way to get things
Well, you
done.
certainly had another example of a problem with the proposed mosque or the building.
Right.
And so has that been resolved?
Well, we approved the project. That project was an as-of-right project that came to us. They voluntarily came to us for approval. Our view of it was that the mosque had been in the Lower Manhattan neighborhood for 23 years,
and
10 blocks away from Ground Zero. So they wanted to move from the site 10 blocks away to a site 3 blocks away. And what's interesting about it is that so many people who opposed it, the Sarah Palins and Newt Gingriches—
had no idea, right?
Well, first of all, they'd never been to the site or to Lower Manhattan. And if they had been to the site, they would have seen that actually—
Isn't even near there.
It wasn't visible in terms of Ground Zero. And so the proximity that they talked about, if they had come, they would have actually seen it.
I think most people felt that it was right there in the area, right? I mean, right on the Ground Zero.
But also those people, they don't want government and health care, yet they want a government, the community board, to restrict the use of an as-of-right project. That is a very slippery slope. It is very problematic. And we had issues with that.
That's very good. So it amazes me what you do and what the whole area is doing. It's just, it is a phenomena that deserves so much more attention. I mean, I can't think of another community in the city that has the same kind of arrangement and kind of activities going on in it.
Well, it's a very dynamic community. It's a very exciting time for Lower Manhattan. As we approach this very solemn anniversary of the 10-year anniversary, the eyes of the world are going to be on Lower Manhattan.
Is the whole area of the Trade Center now accounted for in a plan?
No. There has been progress. So the 9/11 Memorial is opening for the 10-year anniversary. The 9/11 Memorial Museum is opening a year later. Tower 1 is obviously rising. Condé Nast took 1 million square feet in it. Tower 2—
and the completion date is considered when?
Sometime in the next year and a half. So that is on track, and they expect people to move in late 2013, early 2014. And then we have towers 2, 3, and 4. A deal was reached between Larry Silverstein and the Port Authority on the towers. So those are moving forward to the extent that market conditions permit them to. I mean, we've got to face the fact that we're in a tough
office
market.
building?
It is office building.
Not mixed.
But there is retail in the base of the towers, which is important because the community wants that retail. We need to have that retail. The retail at the World Trade Center site had the highest sales per square foot.
I remember, I worked in the World Trade Center, both in Tower 1 and Tower 2, once for the Port Authority and once for the state. And it was that concourse and all that retail space was the busiest thing we could find.
Absolutely. And then the other building site is Tower 5. That's the Deutsche Bank site, which is technically not on the site. It's just south of the site. But we've been pushing very hard to get that site developed. It's our belief that it should be a mixed-use development. You could put housing in there. You could put 80-20 housing in there. It's a great site for 80-20 housing and for a hotel. And we definitely actually need more hotel downtown, given everything that's happening with all the tourists coming.
So did your family participate in their local government?
No, I didn't come from a political family at all. My father was a doctor. He had been stationed at Walter Reed in Washington, D.C., which is how I ended up growing in Washington. My mother's an artist. So they had no involvement in politics whatsoever. Although I do think growing up in Washington, D.C.
You have to get that aura. It has to come through, right?
Right. You're at the nexus of our country's government, and it was a wonderful place to go up and to see that firsthand. I was a poli-sci major at Columbia, so I was interested in the functioning of government, the working of government. It's also why I became a regulatory attorney. So that has been something that has been seeped through all of my
Well, we've come to the end of this half hour. All I could say is that I wish every community board had a mayor like you. And I certainly wish you lots of luck and wish that the Lower Manhattan development and all the promise it has for people really is fulfilled. It basically already is.
Well, thank you so much, Ronnie. I think that all New Yorkers should be proud when this memorial opens, because it's a real testament to the rebuilding and the fact that Al-Qaeda could not keep not only our community down, but the whole city down.
Thank you very much,
Thanks,
Julie.
Ronnie.
Is there any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore? Please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.